When it comes to Daniel Ricciardo, he is undoubtedly one of the drivers under the most pressure in 2022. He had a poor 2021. Relative to his expectations, he massively underdelivered given the car that he was given, and the gap between him and Lando Norris was actually a bit worrying at times. Now, I am going to talk about my expectations for him in 2022, but there was also something that surprised me in 2021, and that was the relatively massive amount of people that started to seriously doubt Daniel Ricciardo as still a top driver. So, can Daniel Ricciardo still cut his teeth at the very sharp end in Formula 1, battling for race wins and maybe even championships? Have people given up on him too soon? Or did we see in 2021 the beginning of his decline? We're gonna get into all of that right now. When you actually look at Daniel Ricciardo's full season in 2021, was it a bad season? Yes. But did he underdeliver to such an extent that he got beat by drivers in slower cars? No. If we accept that at worst McLaren had the fourth fastest car in 2021, that means that theoretically all of the drivers from Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari should have finished ahead of him, which they did, and so did his teammate because he was the better driver in 2021. If you take a look at the championship, he finished in 8th place, behind his teammate and all of the other drivers who had either better cars or better seasons. But he wasn't so ridiculously and laughably bad that he fell behind the likes of the two Alpine drivers or even Pierre Gasly in a very quick AlphaTauri. The best way that I can summarize is that there's no doubt that he underdelivered relative to his teammate and cost the team a potential 3rd place in the Constructors' Championship. But he also wasn't anywhere near as bad as some people made him out to be. He just delivered the bare minimum with the car that he had, and ultimately for a driver of Ricciardo's quality and for a team like McLaren with their massive ambitions, you can't just do the bare minimum, and unlike with some drivers in the midfield, there's also no place to hide when you underperform. In terms of the reasons why Ricciardo struggled, those have now been well documented, and in 2021, he simply couldn't adapt to the different way in which you had to extract performance out of the McLaren MCL35M. In fast corners, the car was actually really good, and this is where Ricciardo was actually very strong, but in slower corners the car had a natural bit of instability and also a bit of nervousness. Now, despite being known as the last of the late breakers, Ricciardo's actual style in real life is to actually brake a little bit earlier, but to have more speed going through the corner. However, in the McLaren, to get its downforce working in low-speed corners, it needed a much more aggressive approach on the brakes going into the corner. Now, it's easy to sit here and just say, well, he should have just braked later, but in reality, it's a lot harder and more complicated than that. You've got to push yourself to steer and brake later than you instinctively want to, whilst at the same time trying to control the car's natural instability. The McLaren was actually quite a unique car in terms of how to extract the most performance out of it, and there was a very funny exchange at the beginning of 2021 that Daniel described between him and Carlos Sainz, who obviously drove for McLaren back in 2020. He said, "I bumped into Carlos not too long ago. He was like, 'What do you think? Strange, huh?' And I was like, 'Thanks for telling me.'" However, what shocked me even more than Ricciardo having a bad season was how many people jumped on the bandwagon immediately to basically call him washed after literally one bad season. I mean, I've seen drivers get criticized, and I've criticized drivers on many occasions on this channel when I think that they've underdelivered, and don't even get me started on the amount of times that I've been called a hater towards a specific driver from their fans just because I've criticized their performance. But anyway, that's a different topic. Quite honestly, however, in Ricciardo's case, the level of hate towards him that I saw online just really surprised me. With Ricciardo, I think people are either forgetting or choosing to ignore just how good he was, not 5, not 4, but how good he was in literally the previous season in 2020. In that shortened and crazy year, he finished 5th in the championship, and even though his teammate Esteban Ocon wasn't that strong on his F1 return, that doesn't take away from Ricciardo, who also gave Renault 2 podiums at the Nürburgring and at Imola, along with a tattoo for Cyril Abiteboul, and more amazingly, he only finished outside of the points in 3 of the 17 races in 2020. What I'm trying to say is that Ricciardo in 2020, which wasn't even that long ago, was at his absolute best, and keep in mind, this is when everyone already knew that he was going to McLaren, but even though he did quit on Renault, he didn't quit on them on the track and just give up, even though the team were probably massively disappointed in knowing that he was going to leave at the end of the season. I think people forget that drivers, just like any athletes, can have bad seasons. Not in terms of where they finish in the championship, because obviously that depends mainly on your car, but more so in terms of their individual performances and also how they stack up to their teammate. Lewis had a bad year in 2011 where he kept crashing with Massa and was able to rebound and reach new heights. Seb had 2 shocking seasons in 2014 and 2020 and was still able to get back to a really high level. Even great drivers have off seasons, and that's why to me, regardless if you're a world champion or a driver in the midfield, I always want to see 2 or 3 seasons in a row of a driver either being really good or really bad before I personally would even come close to labeling them as washed. Having said that, I don't want to also downplay just how much pressure Ricciardo is under in 2022. Like I mentioned earlier, he potentially cost McLaren 3rd in the Constructors. Yes, Ferrari had the stronger package by the end of the season, but Norris showed how strong that car was when he was still 3rd in the championship at the midpoint of the season. That can't happen in 2022. Now obviously, as I'm recording this, we don't know the relative performance levels of each car, and there's always the possibility that the McLaren is the dominant car of 2022, and in that scenario, if Daniel Ricciardo has another bad season, its performance advantage might mask his struggles. But putting that scenario to one side, when you look at the other driver lineups, Hamilton and Russell, Sainz and Leclerc, I actually think that McLaren is in a more similar situation to Red Bull. But even then, I think Verstappen is so strong that even with a weak Perez, it still perhaps makes their lineup better than McLaren's. There is some serious quality at the top of the field, and if McLaren want to continue to make progress, they won't be able to do it with a one-car team. The good news for Ricciardo is that the team understands the problems that he's been going through, and they have tried to take that into account when developing their new car. However, we also have to remember that these 2022 cars have been designed and in development for well over a year in the case of some teams. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that the solution to Ricciardo's struggle was already baked into the initial design of the car. And there is also another side to the coin. Yes, the team want to help Ricciardo, but let's not forget that they have a championship caliber talent that's currently leading the team, and you don't want to do something that might also inadvertently make it more difficult for Lando Norris, who has just signed a long-term contract and who is obviously the future of the team. McLaren have to do a very careful balancing act, and it will test their abilities as a potential top team. In my opinion, Ricciardo can still be on the level of a Leclerc or even a Max Verstappen. I don't think overnight his talent and speed has just disappeared, never to be seen again. It just doesn't make sense to me. But since I still think that he can get back to that top echelon of drivers, I have to judge him as harshly as I do Max or Lewis. If he's still really that guy, then he needs to learn to adapt. Over the off-season, he had to work with the team and understand why he was so fast before and why he was able to adapt to the Red Bull and Renault, but not the McLaren. That's what defines a top driver. You have to be able to drive anything you're given, whether it's a good or a bad car, and extract the most out of it. I still believe that Ricciardo can mix it with the big boys at the top, but he needs to show resilience and he himself needs to prove people wrong. If he does, then we might still come back to the conversation of if McLaren can still build a championship-winning car in the near future, it might still be Ricciardo to take advantage of that situation over Norris. But before then, Ricciardo needs to use 2022 as a blank canvas. I believe he will return to his best, but I'm not so blind as to say that it's a guarantee. It's anything but. There is still the possibility that 2021 wasn't just a blip, but the beginning of the end. If he continues to underdeliver with whatever car he's given relative to Norris in 2022, then I'll come back to this conversation again, and we'll seriously have to take a look at how good Ricciardo really is now, and if he's even the right driver for McLaren if they're serious about going back to winning championships. Well, there you have it, another video wrapped up. I hope you did enjoy this one, and if you did, and if you want to support the channel, then don't forget to smash that subscribe button. That would be greatly appreciated, and I will see you in the next one.